Hey guys, what's up? It's Savannah. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another true crime episode here on my YouTube channel. As you guys can tell by the title of today's video, we are talking about the unsolved murder of 16-year-old Hannah Truelove. Before we get started with today's video, I do want to thank the sponsor for this video, and that is BetterHelp. I don't know about you guys, but I do know that when the 2020 year started, I took a couple days and I really just sat with myself. And I do this every year, but it was more significant this time because it's a new decade. I did this just because I wanted to go over my year, what I was happy with in my life, what I wasn't happy with in my life, things I wanted to change, just an overall assessment. And when doing that is around the same time that I stumbled upon BetterHelp. And if you have never heard of BetterHelp, BetterHelp is a website that basically assesses your needs and matches you with your own professional therapist. Personally, I'm someone who loves therapy. I've been in therapy almost my entire life. I've been in therapy for well over 10 years and I've tried out a bunch of different therapists that were specialized in a bunch of different things. But what differentiates BetterHelp from anything that I've ever tried is the fact that it's all online. So you get the benefit of having a professional therapist, but you also get the comfort of doing it in your own home. Once you sign up, you can start communicating with your therapist within 24 hours, and you will get thoughtful responses from people who actually want to help you. And this is not just self-care, this is professional therapy. You can send a message to your counselor anytime, and you can also set up weekly phone calls or video chat sessions, whichever you prefer. And like I said, it's all online, so you never have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room. You can take away the anxiety that sometimes comes with just going to therapy in general, just getting there. You can do it in the comfort of your own space, which is really nice. BetterHelp is committed to giving you the best help you could possibly get, so if you ever did want to change a counselor, there is no charge for that. And they also offer financial aid to those who need it. So if you're interested in trying BetterHelp out for yourself, you can go to betterhelp.com/instinct to get 10% off your first month using BetterHelp. Again, that is just betterhelp.com/instinct, betterhelp.com/instinct. So again, thank you BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. And with that being said, let's jump right on into today's case. So Hannah Truelove was born on May 18th, 1996 to her parents, Jeff Truelove and Mona Harris. Hannah has two siblings. She has a brother named Clint as well as a sister named Jessica. Hannah was described as very unique. She was very outgoing and she was very popular and she was a free spirit. She wasn't someone who was afraid to speak her mind. She was very sassy, but she was also incredibly loving and had a bright, bright future ahead of her. Now, I wasn't able to figure out exactly when this happened in Hannah's life, but I do know at some point after Hannah was born, her parents did end up getting a divorce. And after this happened, Hannah, as well as her mother Mona, moved to Gainesville, Georgia. While they were in Gainesville, they ended up moving into the Lake Lanier Club apartments. Hannah attended Gainesville High School. She loved gymnastics, she loved music, she loved to sing, and her dream when she grew up was to become a veterinarian. So let's talk about August 23rd, 2012. And I will warn you because this case is definitely one that doesn't have a lot of information and it's incredibly frustrating. Once we get to the theories, you might be sitting there and wondering, is this really all we have to go off of? But the answer is yes, and that's why this case is still unsolved. So on the earlier evening hours of August 23rd, Mona ended up coming home to her apartment that she shared with her daughter after a long day of work. Now, once she got to the apartment, she was kind of surprised to see that Hannah was not home. Typically, Hannah would be there when she got home from work, but on this particular day, she was not. Regardless of her not being there at that point in time, Mona did know that Hannah at some point was at the apartment because Hannah had gotten the mail from the mailbox and left it on their couch. On this particular day, Mona was extremely tired and exhausted. She just wanted to take a nap, so that's what she ended up doing. She took a nap thinking that by the time she woke up, Hannah would be home, everything would be all fine. But a couple hours later, when Mona did wake up, Hannah was still not home. So Mona decided that the best thing to do after waking up from her nap and realizing that Hannah still wasn't home would be to call Hannah's father, Jeff. Now, the reason that she did this is because Hannah and Jeff would go on planned dinner dates. That was kind of their time together. It was their time to connect, to see each other because Hannah's parents were divorced. They would pick a day, they would go to dinner, and that would be their time. And so Mona thought that there's a possibility that Hannah could have gone off with Jeff and had this dinner date planned and she just wasn't aware of it. Maybe it slipped her mind. But when Mona called Jeff and Jeff told Mona that Hannah wasn't with him and they didn't have a dinner date planned, she decided the next best thing to do would be to call some of Hannah's friends and see if she was with them. Now, after making multiple different phone calls to a couple of Hannah's friends and them also saying that Hannah wasn't with them, Mona knew that something was very, very wrong, and that is when she decided to call the police to file a missing persons report, and that was at about 10:30 p.m. on August 23rd. So when authorities arrived at the Lake Lanier Club apartments, the first thing that they decided to do is search the entire complex as well as the surrounding areas of it, so the town and neighborhoods surrounding the apartment complex. Now here's where things got a little tricky, because the night of August 23rd, 2012 in Gainesville, Georgia, there was a rainstorm that came through. Now at first, police and Mona, Hannah's mother, were pretty optimistic, thinking that maybe if Hannah was out with friends and was just avoiding her mother, didn't want to come home, that she would end up coming home because she wouldn't want to be out in the rain. Unfortunately though, that was not the case, and after a night of searching, police did have to go back to Mona at the Lake Lanier apartments and tell her that they were unsuccessful in finding Hannah on their initial search. So now we move into August 24th, the day after Hannah went missing. There was a man who had been walking through the woods. Now to kind of paint the picture for you, you have the Lake Lanier apartments, and then behind the Lake Lanier apartments, it's basically like the backyard of the apartments is a wooded area. It's the woods basically. So you have the apartments and then you have the woods, and this man was walking through the woods on August 24th. While he was walking through the woods, he ended up seeing something that he said looked like a mannequin. However, he had heard that Hannah had gone missing the day prior, which is why he decided to get a little closer to it and get a better look at it. And once he got closer, he was able to see that what he thought was a mannequin was actually human remains. And because he had heard that Hannah had gone missing the day prior, he was almost positive that the remains that he had found were Hannah Truelove's. And once he found them, he ended up calling the authorities, and authorities came to the apartment, went to the wooded area, and was able to positively identify the body that was found in the woods to belong to Hannah Truelove. When authorities got to Hannah's body, they were able to figure out that she had been stabbed to death. She had been stabbed multiple times, but because of the rainstorm that had occurred the night prior, any possible DNA evidence that typically would have either been on Hannah herself or around the crime scene in general, that had all been washed away. So with this case, the authorities were really starting from scratch. So the first thing authorities wanted to do is try to piece together what exactly happened on August 23rd. And what they were able to figure out is that on this particular day, kind of in the late afternoon hours of it, Hannah was seen hanging out with some friends on the lawn area of the complex. You guys know how sometimes in apartment complexes, one of the facilities they'll have is a lawn. It's a field of grass, kids will play on it, people will play some sports on it, maybe throw a football around, a soccer ball, things like that. And Hannah was seen on the lawn at about 4 p.m. by some of the other residents that lived in the complex. This area that they were on, this lawn area, was a pretty active area. On this particular day, there were a lot of kids out there. There were people running around, playing sports. It was late August, so it's warm outside. People are out and active and doing things, and that is where Hannah was at that particular time. So there was a witness that came forward, someone who was also on the lawn during the time that Hannah was, and this witness told authorities that there had been a mid-sized 4-door silver SUV sedan type of car that had pulled up to where Hannah was. Now, about 10 to 15 minutes after this car had pulled up, Hannah was seen walking behind a young man who had gotten out of the car. Now, this young man was not the only person in the car, but he is the only one who got out of the car. And like I said, about 10 to 15 minutes after this car pulled into the complex, Hannah was seen walking behind a young man into the wooded area where her body was eventually found. People who saw this happen said that Hannah was walking behind the young man about 10 to 15 steps, so she wasn't walking side by side with him. It was very clear that he was leading the way. Hannah and this man walked across the parking lot and into the woods. This young man was described as an African American man, and he could have been anywhere in between his late teens to early 20s. But even though Hannah was seen walking behind this man into the woods, that was actually not the last time Hannah had ever been seen. Hannah was actually seen alive about an hour after this interaction had happened. To this day, no one has been able to actually identify who the man that Hannah was talking to was. However, because she was seen alive about an hour later, police have come forward and said that the person that she was seen talking to is only considered a person of interest and not a suspect, and that they just want to talk to this person to ask them questions about what happened that day. day. Police also have come forward and said that they believe that the person who murdered Hannah more than likely was someone that she knew. The police have also said that they believe that the murder occurred at the same place that Hannah's body was found. They don't really believe that it was placed there. There were no drag marks around the area that she was found. There was no evidence because it had been washed away, and they just don't believe she was placed there. They believe where she was found was where she was murdered. And I have seen from multiple sources that Hannah's last way of communicating was actually not through a cell phone, it was through a Nintendo DS. Apparently during the time that she went missing, her phone was confiscated, so it was taken away. She didn't have it, but she did have her Nintendo DS, and that was her way of communicating with other people. So because Hannah didn't have her cell phone, police weren't able to track it and see if Hannah ended up leaving the complex that day or if she was at the complex for the entire time. So because of the lack of evidence, as well as this being a homicide investigation, police did do a little bit more digging into Hannah's personal life. And when they did this, they were able to figure out that Hannah was extremely active on social media. Social media was her thing. She loved posting pictures of herself. She loved updating her statuses on Facebook and especially Twitter. She tweeted all the time. Her Twitter page, as well as all of her tweets, are actually still public. So I was able to comb through them, and for the most part, it really did seem like her Twitter, it was a combination of her talking about her love life. There was definitely a love interest in her life, and she also tweeted a lot of sassy little comments and quotes. But what police noticed when looking into her social media accounts is that the days leading up to August 23rd, her tweets started to become a little bit more worrisome. On August 12th, 2012, just 11 days before Hannah's disappearance, Hannah tweeted, quote, "I got me a ugly ass stalker." On August 18th, 2012, Hannah tweeted, "So scared right now." Now, according to police, they were able to identify who this stalker that Hannah was referring to was. They were able to track this person down, and after questioning him and interrogating him, they were able to clear him from any involvement in Hannah's case. One of Hannah's last tweets was on August 22nd, 2012, which was just the day before she went missing, and she tweeted, quote, "I need to move out of these dang apartments." So this was kind of hard for police to decipher what was just normal teenage drama stuff or if there was anything more serious that was happening in her life. But after going through her tweets and kind of going through everything that she talked about, police did lean more with that it was just kind of her being a dramatic teenager and that it really wasn't anything deeper than that. So like I said in the beginning about this case, there are a lot more questions than there are answers. There's a lot more theories than there are facts, and it is infuriating. Most people believe that the main reason this case has remained unsolved after 8 years is due to the rainstorm that potentially washed all the evidence away. And a lot of people also believe that the police have a good idea as to who was responsible for Hannah's murder. However, because of the lack of evidence, they aren't able to confirm it and are really hoping just for a confession at this point. So let's run through a list of potential theories because I have a couple to talk about. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about it. And then we'll talk about what I kind of think at the end of this. And then I have one more piece of just bizarre information to share with you at the end of the video. So the first theory that we have in this case is that Hannah was murdered by someone who also lived at the Lake Lanier Club apartments. A lot of people have questioned if her tweet regarding "I need to move out of these dang apartments" and also regarding the stalker that she talked about, if that meant there could have been someone stalking her at the apartment and that's why she wanted to move out, if she felt in fear for her life and felt like she needed to leave the apartments. However, if we're playing devil's advocate, there's also a very good chance Hannah was tweeting "I need to get out of these dang apartments" because she just wanted to get out of the apartments, you know? She wanted to move into a house, she wanted to move somewhere else. There's a ton of different meanings that that tweet could have had, but people have supported this theory by saying that Hannah went missing at about 7:30 p.m. on August 23rd, and the community in this complex was very active. There was a lot of people running around at all times, and if there was someone at the complex who either didn't look like they were supposed to be there or didn't look familiar, that probably would have stood out. And that example was proven when Hannah spoke to an unidentified man earlier in the afternoon. People noticed that whoever Hannah was talking to didn't live at the complex, so if someone did take Hannah who lived at the apartments, it would have been easy for them to blend into the crowd and not seem suspicious in any way. And mind you, the woods behind the complex where Hannah's body was found is just a quarter mile away from where she lived, which we're gonna get into later, but just keep that in mind. The woods were a quarter mile away, but Hannah was seen alive an hour later. So she had time to come back to the complex and resituate herself before she ended up going missing. Now, another theory in this case is that Hannah was pregnant at the time of her murder. There's different people out there who say that she was faking a pregnancy for attention, and there's people out there who actually believe she was pregnant. Also, a bunch of sources out there who are saying that there was a love triangle between her best friend at the time, and either her boyfriend or Hannah's boyfriend or an ex-boyfriend. Just a weird love triangle situation going on that's very unclear. But basically how this theory goes is that Hannah was either A, pregnant, or B, faking a pregnancy for attention. And whoever the father of this baby was, or whoever the person she was trying to get attention was, she ended up telling them about it, and this person freaked out and ended up murdering Hannah. I think something that supports this theory that a lot of people have clung on to is the fact that leading up to Hannah's disappearance, she had tweeted multiple times about her stomach hurting. She tweeted about gaining weight. She tweeted about her stomach growing. She tweeted about symptoms that people sometimes get when they're pregnant. And so I think because of that, that's led a lot of people to believe that maybe she was pregnant at the time. However, there has been nothing that has come out to the public that has stated that Hannah was pregnant. The autopsy results have not been released to the public, so we don't know. However, I do think that if Hannah was pregnant and if the police were able to prove that, it does give them a possible motive. And the only reason I kind of question this theory is because I feel like if they did have a motive, they would be able to figure out who either got her pregnant, who the father of the child was, or whose attention she was trying to get. They would be able to hone in on a particular person who could have been involved in this. Does that make sense? I don't know. I feel like if it came back and she was pregnant, that gives police motive, which leads them to a suspect, which ultimately could possibly solve this case. That's just where my mind was going when I was doing all of this research. So another theory in this case is that Hannah's murder could have possibly been a result of gang violence. Now, if you go onto Hannah's Facebook page, she is friends with multiple people who are a part of a street gang in Gainesville. And some people have questioned if Hannah's murder was a result of a gang initiation. Some people have tried to link the unidentified person as someone who was in a gang when we just don't know that. You know, we don't know that. But with the unidentified person that she was seen with, it does seem a little bit questionable that after her murder, if you did have absolutely nothing to do with it, you wouldn't just come forward and be like, yeah, I was with her, we talked about this, but then she was seen an hour later and I had nothing to do with it. So it does make me wonder if there was like some shady conversation that was happening that this person doesn't want police to know about, or if there is a connection between this person and Hannah's murder. It doesn't look good. This is what I want to pick your guys' brains about. Hannah was reported missing on August 23rd, and police did a thorough search through and around the complex, in the areas surrounding the complex, and like I said, Hannah's body was found a quarter of a mile away from her home in the woods, which is practically the backyard of her apartment. So because of this, I question whether or not Hannah was taken off of the complex, taken off site, away from the complex, and brought back. But if there's a possibility that the reason this unidentified man came to the complex to meet with Hannah, I wonder if maybe they talked about plans later that night and whether they planned on whoever this unidentified person was to come back to the complex and pick Hannah up because she didn't have her phone. And that was their way of making plans, was to do it in person. I just find it bizarre that police weren't able to locate her until the next day if she was only a quarter mile away from her home. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it does happen. And I know they said that there were no drag marks, so it's unlikely that she was placed there. But because of the lack of evidence, I question if she was actually murdered there or if someone dropped her off there. I don't know. You guys can let me know what you think. And like I said, at this point, all of those theories that we talked about are just theories. There's nothing that has been proven. This case is still unsolved after 8 years. And there's a killer walking around freely still. And that is absolutely terrifying to think about, because not only does Hannah and her family deserve justice, but there's a possibility that this person could have the capability of doing this again. Before we close out this video, so like I said, I had a bizarre thing to talk to you guys about at the end of this episode. And that thing, I guess, that bizarre thing is Lake Lanier. And I almost feel like Lake Lanier could have its own episode in and of itself. So let's just talk about it, because Lake Lanier is in Georgia. Hannah lived at the Lake Lanier Club Apartments. She lived right off of it. And Lake Lanier is actually known as Georgia's most cursed lake. And if you live in Georgia, if you lived in the area, please let me know everything you know about this in the comments below as well as your theories with Hannah's case. Now, before I get into it, I do want to say this definitely brings a more paranormal angle into this video. And before we get into that, I need to say that I'm not saying that Hannah's murder was a result of a paranormal anything, because I don't think it is. I'm just the type of person where I need to see facts, I need to see proof, and I need to see evidence. And I usually steer away from paranormal stuff on my channel, but I did think that this was very interesting. So the reason that Lake Lanier is known as the most cursed lake in Georgia is because of the overwhelming amount of bizarre accidents and deaths that have occurred on and around the lake. There have been a strange amount of boating accidents, drownings, and cars driving into the lake. A lot of these drowning accidents have happened to strong swimmers who were swimming in calm conditions, and the people who were actually able to survive these near-death drowning accidents said that while it was happening, they either felt like they were being pulled underwater by a pair of unseen hands, or that the air in their lungs seemed to just completely suddenly leave. In 2012, the same year Hannah was murdered, there were two young boys riding a pontoon on the lake when they were hit by a speeding boat, and both passed away. Another accident that happened here was, I don't know if you guys remember this, back in 2012, Usher's ex-wife's son also passed away after being hit by a jet ski while he was on an inner tube, and this actually left him brain dead, and eventually he ended up passing away from it. That accident also happened on Lake Lanier. In 2015, there was a 25-year-old man named Kelly Nash who went missing from his home in Bufford, Georgia on January 5th, 2015, and his body was found in Lake Lanier a month later with a gunshot wound to his head, and to this day that case has also been unsolved. In November of 1990, there was actually construction happening on the lake because they were building the Lake Lanier Bridge, and in order to do that, they had to clear out the lake so they could put pillars in order to hold the bridge up. And when they ended up clearing out and draining the lake, they ended up finding a car at the bottom of the lake. Now, this car did have a decomposed body inside of it, and the body was so badly decomposed they weren't able to identify it at the time. However, after going through some of the belongings that were also found in the car, they were able to identify the person in the car as Susie Roberts. Now, Susie, as well as her friend Delia Parker Young, both went missing after a night out together in 1954. But at the time that they did this in 1990, Susie's body was the only one that was found. But what they were able to link together is that about 18 months prior to Susie's body being found, there had actually been a decomposed body that had floated to the surface of the water. This body was missing both of its hands as well as two of its toes on its left foot. Now, after they were able to find Susie's body and identify her, they identified the body that floated to the surface of the water, missing both hands and two toes, as Delia Parker Young. To this day, no one has been able to explain why Delia's hands as well as two of her toes were missing. And when Susie and Delia's bodies were recovered, this tale, I guess you could say, of Lady of the Lake was born. Now, this whole idea was kind of born when multiple people claimed to have seen a ghostly woman walking up and down the Lake Lanier Bridge in a blue dress and having no hands. Like I said, people have called her Lady of the Lake, and Delia was last seen in a blue dress. In 2013, there was the murder of Kayla Jean Wheel, who was 20 years old, and her remains were found at a park right near Lake Lanier. And in 2015, there was a murder-suicide after a car had driven itself into Lake Lanier. And of course, we have the main focus of this episode, Hannah Truelove, who died right near the lake as well in 2012. Now, like I said, I don't believe that Hannah's death was a result of some paranormal whatever that happened at Lake Lanier, but the amount of deaths that have occurred either on or around Lake Lanier is very, very bizarre. So let me know what you guys think about that as well. And with that being said, you guys, that is all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another true crime episode here on my YouTube channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Savannah. I make videos 3 days a week, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. You should subscribe and join the family. I love you guys so much, and I'll be back in a couple days with a brand new video. Bye, guys.